hour together. I'm here to witness, as you all will, the magic that comes out of this human being's fingers and out of his brain. What we discussed before was how it would be lovely to be able to trace all these years of history of Cuban music. But I'm going to let him play and do what he wants to do, and I'm going to interpret. We're going to hold space for questions at any point. This is about what you all would like to learn from this incredible human being and his trajectory of music. So we don't have a plan, we don't have a script, but he is an essential improviser. This is the essence of Chucho Valdez, is his ability to improvise on any theme in any given moment. And so there's nothing really I need to do beyond just being here and witnessing as you all will. So maestro, lo que usted quiera hacer, de la manera que lo quiera hacer, yo estoy aquí para ayudar.
Perfecto. Quiero presentarme.
Usa el micrófono si no. Sí.
Sí, ¿se escucha, no?
Sí.
Bueno, yo deseo presentarme. Deseo presentarme. Yo me llamo Dionisio Jesús Valdez Rodríguez, me dicen Chucho.
He says, first I'd like to introduce you. My real name is Dionisio Jesús Valdez, and they call him Chucho.
Acabo de cumplir 80 años.
He just turned 80 years old.
Creo que en mi mal inglés, 80 quiere decir 80.
Yes, in my very poor English, I think 80 is 80.
Pero yo creo que hay ahí una cierta confusión, porque yo acabo de entrar en mi segunda adolescencia.
But I think there might be some confusion because I feel like I've just reached my second adolescence.
Entonces la confusión es que yo no soy un 80 years old.
So the confusion is I don't feel like an 80-year-old person.
Yo soy un teenager years old.
He's a teenager years old. Is that the same? Yeah.
I am joking.
Está bromeando.
Entonces, no, cualquier pregunta, vamos a hablar de la historia del piano cubano a partir de finales del siglo XIX.
Any question you might have, but his goal is to kind of speak to the evolution of history of Cuban piano for the last 100 or so years, 150 years. So, should we start with a question, or empezamos con alguna pieza que quiera tocar?
Sí, vamos a hacer algo así, quizás de Cervantes, de Bona.
Okay, so if you were at the lecture I gave the other day, we talked about Ignacio Cervantes and Mr. Lebona as two of the sort of formative piano icons of Cuba, and also in terms of their compositional output. So he's going to demonstrate some pieces in the style of, as well as pieces by Ignacio Cervantes and Mr. Lebona.
Estos fue uno de los grandes genios, ¿no? del siglo XIX, y él estudió en Francia, se graduó en París, en el Conservatorio de París con honores, con medalla de oro, Cervantes.
Ignacio Cervantes is one of the great composers of the 19th century era. He studied in Paris, went to the conservatory there, and graduated with honors, so he was a prolific pianist as well as composer.
Y su influencia ha trascendido en toda la historia de la pianística cubana.
And his influence has transcended all aspects of Cuban pianism.
También, bueno, influyó en Ernesto Lecuona, que fue uno de los más grandes pianistas y compositores de todos los tiempos en Cuba.
He's one of the great influences to Ernesto Lecuona, who of course is known as one of the greatest composers of all time from Cuba.
Uno de sus obras más conocidas es la comparsa de Lecuona.
And one of Lecuona's most famous pieces that Chucho will interpret is La Comparsa. Ha sido ya una versión suya.
Sí.
So it's important to clarify that what you just heard was Chucho's rendition of that very famous piece. Every time he plays that piece, it will be different. And the great improvisational tradition, so he's done some reharmonization, right? Some different voicings, but it's still Lecuona's piece.
¿Alguna pregunta?
Any questions so far? For the pianists who are in the space here today, we were talking about the use of the left hand and the syncopation that you heard, and that ostinato that's happening. So you hear that I'm tapping the clave while I say that, because these rhythmical structures are sort of an inherent aspect of 19th century piano composition. They were drawing from the percussion traditions and inserting them into the compositional aesthetic. Estoy explicando la obra de Lecuona, tiene mucho que ver con la percusión y el hecho de importar, digamos, esos ritmos en la mano izquierda.
¿Y?
Any questions?
¿Any question? Bueno, entonces me toca seguir hablando.
So he's going to keep talking.
Pero bueno, esto empieza de lo que estamos hablando ya a finales del siglo XIX. En el siglo XX todo empieza como que a partir de ahí a cambiar. Y nace uno de los primeros, bueno, un ritmo cubano que es el baile nacional, creo que hasta el ritmo nacional es danzón.
So it's very important to recognize that with this 19th century repertoire, at the very tail end of the 19th century, you have the birth of Cuba's national dance, the danzón. And the danzón is this sort of fusion of European country dance or contra dance influences with the Africanized rhythm. And so we start to see compositions in the early 20th century that completely transform danzón as it continues its evolution.
Yo voy a tratar de, usando el mismo figurado de la mano izquierda, como esto puede pasar también a formar parte del danzón de cierta manera.
So he's going to take that same left hand ostinato idea and create the sort of gradual transformation in some of the different examples. Right.
Entonces, a partir de ahora, todo lo que vaya a tocar estoy inventando.
So from this point on, everything you hear is going to be completely improvised. evolution and the bluesification of what he did. So you heard some like blues gospel kind of components in there. But that left hand dun, 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 was a constant all the way through. Any questions about what you just heard or comments? I mean, it's not even about asking as much as just expressing our awe, because that's allowed. Yeah.
So when you studied, as a young man, when you studied music, when you studied the classical tradition, did you ever combine something like Bach with the Cuban rhythms?
Perfect question. The short answer is yes. His counterpoint teacher would get mad at him for taking Bach pieces and montunifying them, Bach-ifying them. She'd leave the room and he would start taking Bach pieces and transforming them. But a lo mejor podría demostrar el hecho de combinar la influencia clásica con lo cubano, porque es una cosa que usted hizo como estudiante, no solo como...
Entonces podría hacerlo. The rhythmical style he was referencing was the conga. Right, that unmistakable element of the percussion making its way into the piano. Le expliqué también que cuando estaba estudiando con la profesora, el hecho de coger los temas de Bach y hacer la transportación a otro nivel. So yes, I think part of the formation in the conservatory system in Cuba, and this is of course before the Cuban Revolution, was the European classical aesthetic and the training, but importante hablar del bebo. It's important to understand his upbringing and his father's place as a musician, a pianist, band director, arranger, classically trained, deeply immersed in jazz and Cuban popular music. And so Chucho early on at age 3 was already transcribing melodies, but left and right hand at age 3, and being able to bring all those elements together. And his father, Bebo, was a very strong, a good friend of Ernesto Lecuona. Si quieren contar el cuento de la visita de Ernesto. Sí, yo tenía 13 años.
He was about 13 years old.
Y me estaba preparando para un examen de piano en la escuela de música.
He was getting ready to take his juries at the conservatory, and he was
entonces yo me acuerdo que yo me estaba estudiando una obra de Lecuona.
You remember studying one of Lecuona's pieces?
Me la estaba tutoreando mi padre.
Really trying to impress his father and make sure that he was doing what he was supposed to be doing.
Y entonces, como un día antes de ir al examen, él trae a otra persona para que me diera opiniones, ¿no? Le diera opiniones sobre lo que estaba haciendo.
So one day his father brought over a friend to be another observer of Chucho's progress in preparation for his exams.
Yo creo que, no me recuerdo bien, yo creo que era la malagueña, una obra de Lecuona, esa de la más.
I knew it was a Lecuona piece, probably la malagueña.
Y entonces yo, señor ahí, mi papá, yo lo toqué y eso, y le pregunta al señor, Ernesto, ¿qué te parece?
So his father asks this man about Chucho's performance. So Ernesto, what do you think?
Y yo le pregunto, papá, ¿Ernesto qué?
And he asks his father, who's Ernesto? Who's this guy Ernesto?
Dice, Ernesto Lecuona, el autor de la obra.
Ernesto Lecuona, the composer of the piece you just performed.
No.
I always love that story.
No, resultó. Si yo sé que Ernesto Lecuona, yo no le toco eso.
If he had known it was Ernesto Lecuona, he wouldn't have dared to play the piece in front of him. So that was a typical house household, right? Y después cuando tocó por primera vez con la orquesta de tu papá en Tropicana, tendrías como 16, 17 años o 19. Hay una foto tuya.
Pero voy a hacer una anécdota antes que me pasó con mi papá.
So he was going to talk a little bit more about some anecdotes about his father before he gets into that.
Ya yo estaba con la orquesta de Bebo, Sabor de Cuba.
So this is when his father had an orchestra named called Orquesta Sabor de Cuba.
Entonces, mi papá dirigía la orquesta y yo era muy jovencito, yo era el pianista.
Right. Father was the conductor, and then Chucho would play.
Yo creo que yo tenía 17 años.
Probably about 17 years old.
Entonces viene una pareja de bailarines españoles
So it was
a Cuba.
a flamenco dance couple, a Spanish dance couple that came to Cuba.
No era música bailable ni música cubana.
It was not dance music or Cuban music by any means.
Entonces vienen con una obra de un compositor impresionista español que se llama Manuel de Falla.
Instead, they were bringing a piece of music by the composer, Spanish composer Manuel de Falla.
Esa obra se llama El sombrero de tres picos.
That was the three-cornered hat, right? The sombrero de tres picos piece.
Entonces la orquesta paraba y se quedaba el piano tocando lo que estaba escrito, una cosa bien complicada, ¿no?
So in the middle of this sort of orchestral number, they would stop and the piano would have this cadenza.
Sí, porque era piano con los bailarines.
The piano with the dancers.
Entonces llegamos al ensayo.
We got to the rehearsal.
Yo le digo a mi papá, bueno, que todo está bien difícil y yo estoy empezando ahora.
He said, "But Dad, this music is really hard, and I'm just starting out. I'm just getting started."
Entonces me dice, qué bueno,
That's good.
porque ahora yo no voy a ir, ahora que va a tocar todo esto, yo no voy a ir a ese concierto.
Because his father said, "Because I'm not the one who's going to play the piano. You are.
Y yo le decía, no me puedes hacer
You
esto,
can't do that to me."
no me hagas esto, porque esto no va así, me cuesta, eso es muy difícil.
It's too hard for me. It's very, very difficult.
Y me dijo, bueno, pero la escuela del conservatorio es una y la de la calle es otra escuela.
He said, "But the conservatory is one school, and the streets are another one. Right? Real life.
Y entonces tú vas a tener que aprender ahora así.
So you got to learn that way from now on."
Bueno, yo no podía creer que me hacía eso, ¿no?
Didn't believe that this was happening to me.
Yo pasé muchísimo trabajo porque era una hora complicada.
This was a very complex work that he had to learn.
Entonces, muy a pesar mío, tuve que irme con la orquesta. Tuve que ir y él no fue. Cuando llegamos al lugar del concierto, yo voy a tocar el la del piano, ¿no?
So he goes to play concert A and you get everybody tuned up.
Y cuando toco el la, este es el la, ¿no? El la sonaba así.
The whole piano was tuned a whole step lower.
Entonces ya no era que tenía que tocar eso, sino que entonces yo le digo al que estaba dirigiendo la orquesta, que se llamaba Emilio Peñalver.
Not only did I have to play and tell the musical director at the time, Alberto Peñalver,
Le digo, mira, esto como está, yo casi no puedo con esto, pero mira a ver si la orquesta puede transportar.
can the whole orchestra transpose a whole step down, or a whole step up?
No era un tono, era medio tono bajo lo que estaba el piano.
And the medio, it wasn't a whole step, it was a half step. Then it was off. Oh God. So you had to transpose on the spot.
Entonces todo lo que estaba escrito había que tocarlo con las teclas negras.
Oh, so you had to go
Todo
for
el
my keys,
medio
my keys.
Yo quería desaparecer,
I wanted to disappear.
pero no había otra opción. Me dijo, no, toda esta orquesta no va a
The whole
transportar
orchestra can't transpose, and you're the one who doesn't
por
transpose.
tu culpa. Y a mí me ayudó mucho el oído, muchísimo. O sea, el oído,
He has an incredible ear, and I'm saying the word incredible because he's saying, "Yeah, yes, my ear's pretty good. His ear's pretty good, yeah."
my GPS.
Yes.
Y yo no sé cómo fue, pero yo lo pude hacer.
Somehow I was able to do it.
No sería perfecto, pero yo lo
It
hice.
might not have been perfect, but at least we got through it.
Entonces, bueno, terminó eso y cuando veo a mi papá le digo, nunca más me vuelvas a hacer eso.
But the next time he saw his father, he said, just don't do that to me again, please, I ask.
Sí, me dijo, yo te prometo que nunca va a volver a pasar.
He says, I'll promise you'll never go through that again.
Entonces, pocas semanas después,
A few weeks later,
yo me acuerdo que era un sábado.
there was a Saturday.
Mi papá era el director musical del Hotel Sevilla en La Habana, que está en Prado.
Father was the musical director at the time of the band that was playing the whole in Sevilla.
Entonces el show del Sevilla lo acompañaba el piano, un bajo y una batería y una sesión de percusión.
So that rhythm section, it was just a rhythm section, piano with percussion and bass.
Pero la orquesta era el piano. La orquesta era el piano, él tenía que hacer todo. Y entonces ese sábado estábamos viendo una película de cowboy, estoy hablando de los años 50, de un actor de apellido James Arness.
Oh, so that day on TV there was a Western, American Western, with the actor whose name is James Ernest, yeah.
Yeah.
In the 50s.
Era
Yeah,
como-
Gunsmoke, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Gunsmoke.
Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
Nunca se me olvida eso, el miedo que pasé también. Y entonces, cuando se acaba la película, me dice, viste,
So when the film is over, or the show is over, his father says, get dressed.
yo no voy a salir para que me tengo
I
que
wasn't planning on going anywhere.
Dice, no, porque hoy tú vas a tocar el show de Sevilla, yo no voy a ir.
Because today you're going to play the show for me at the Sevilla Hotel, not me.
Eso era peor todavía.
That was even worse than the other time. Trial by fire, I guess.
Yo había oído el show, yo había visto el show, yo nunca lo había tocado.
He had seen the show and heard it a number of times, but never played, never seen the music.
Imagínate lo que decía mi papá, había que hacerlo.
And whatever my dad said I had to do, I had to do.
Bueno, no puedo decir la palabra, pero era cagándome.
Like that. It was a scary moment.
Bueno, entonces fui y lo pude hacer.
Somehow he did it.
Fue lo peor que me pasó.
It was the worst that had ever happened to him. Right?
Porque entonces a cada rato, como ya yo lo había hecho una vez, me decía, hoy vas tú.
Right, because every time he'd do this and accomplish what his father had asked and expected of him, there would be another moment, right? So there was always this expectation that he was going to come through. Okay, and therefore.
Bueno, resumiendo todas estas cosas que he contado, un día me pregunto otra vez, ¿por qué me hacen estas cosas?
So one day, a few years later after this, why do you do these things to me? He said.
¿Viste? Porque los músicos tienen que aprender en la práctica muchísimas cosas que no enseñan en la escuela.
Because musicians in real life have to learn things that you'll never learn in school.
Entonces, en ese momento yo lo entendí.
That's the moment I understood why he did it.
Y entonces ya a partir de ese momento, nosotros teníamos dos negocios. Él tenía dos negocios, perdón. Tenía la Orquesta Sabor de Cuba y su cuarteto.
At that time, his father had these two different things he was doing, the orchestra, Sabor de Cuba, and this quartet.
Entonces a veces me decía, oye, yo me voy con la orquesta y tú te vas con el
So they would
cuarteto.
trade off. One would go with the quartet, one would go with the orchestra, so Chucho had to be prepared to deal with both scenarios.
Otra vez me decía, tú te vas con el cuarteto y yo me voy con la orquesta.
Not easy.
Pero fue una forma de aprender en la práctica, fuera de la escuela, ¿no? Fue una forma una manera de irme haciendo músico ahí en el peligro.
Right. And that was the way to develop as a musician, was almost like in a danger zone, right? But in a way that was absolutely motivating and essential in life.
Hoy se lo agradezco mucho.
And of course, he's very grateful to his father to this day.
Se lo descarga que quería bajar.
That was a great jam session of the moment.
Pero bueno, tú me has hecho una pregunta.
Sí, no me acuerdo lo que te pregunté, pero lo que estábamos hablando antes de tu amor por Chopin, y el concepto del disco de tributo a Three Faces of Leguana. Estábamos hablando de que como era una manera de interpretar a Leguana, pero como un estilo de Chopin.
¿Podemos hacerlo?
Yeah, so I was mentioning earlier, I was asking him about this recording he did. It was produced in New York, called The Three Faces of Leguana, where he has always been infatuated with the music of Chopin, and he wanted to do something in tribute to Chopin, knowing that he doesn't consider himself a classical pianist, but how he could pay tribute to Chopin in his interpretation of Leguana.
Advierto algo. ¿Cómo se dice? Advice. Advierto
I have a warning, a word of warning.
que yo no soy Frank Sinatra.
He's not Frank Sinatra.
Pero esto se llama Chopin in My Way.
Chopin in my way, isn't it? to Art Tatum and Bud Powell and Boogie Woogie Joe, and of course all of that is Chucho, linking all that together. And that fluidity is what is always so extraordinary, right? To hear someone who has that, the vocabulary, it's a multilingual approach stylistically and also pianistically. And it's just such an incredible thing to witness. And every time you hear it, it's different. Estoy explicando un poquito sobre, digamos, las fuentes musicales, pero todo eso sigue siendo tú. Eso es tú. Esa es tu manera de poder coserlo todo, ¿no? De hacerlo todo.
Sí, realmente me enseñaron al mismo tiempo que iba al conservatorio, iba al Tatum, en casa se tocaba Chopin, se hacía jazz, el Tatum, los padres, todo esto, como que yo fui absorbiendo eso como una sola cosa.
So for him, in his formation, he was absorbing all those things simultaneously. You know, going to the conservatory and having to study the European aesthetic, his father being who he was, and also listening to jazz and listening to these incredible pianists and knowing their importance in the jazz lexicon. And also music of the popular music of the time, Peruchín y los otros pianistas cubanos que estaban desarrollando la música bailable. So you know, and his father would tell him, go and study with them, but don't imitate what they're doing. Take what they give you and do your own thing. And that is probably I think the most telling aspect of Chucho's playing is that it's still him. Like I hear the references, but it's still Chucho. And you know, and that's hard to do in any musical genre, to have your identity, your musical identity.
Al final todo es música.
And at the end, it's all music, right? Yes.
I'm really enjoying this. My husband and I have come to hear you in many cities, Ottawa, Montreal, Boston. We're coming to New York in June. You're coming to New York in June. We're coming too.
Ya visto en todas las ciudades te siguen.
Sí.
Donde quiera vienen a la vez en Nueva York, a Boston.
Thank you.
So I was expecting you to mention Gershwin, and you didn't, but that's okay. We watched a YouTube video of you playing with Michelle Camilo and Ruben Gonzalez, and you kept
Gonzalo Rubalcaba.
So my question is, you're all improvisers, and you play similar pieces but different pieces. You know each other's styles, you know each other's techniques, you know each other's taste. When three of you are improvising together, how does that work? You want to go off and play Chopin, and Camilo plays Gershwin, right? And he recorded Gershwin. How do you somehow manage the three of you to communicate and come up with this beautiful music?
Entendió la pregunta, que el video que ella vio es el momento en Set Jazz cuando tú y Gonzalo y Michelle Camilo estaban alternando, y cómo es que se comunican y se ponen de acuerdo en cómo van a formar las piezas, y cada uno tiene su estilo diferente. ¿Cómo es que cuál es el proceso de creación en ese momento?
El proceso de creación precisamente está en que las bases armónicas de lo que vayamos a tocar nosotros las tengamos muy seguras.
So the turning point here is really that the harmonic process, or the agreement as to what we're going to do harmonically is firmly entrenched with all three of us, right? Like we have to know, this is the form, these are the chords, you know. Let's start with that.
Y entonces lo que pasa a partir de ahí son variaciones.
But then what you hear, from that point on are just variations on that theme, or those themes.
O sea, cuando ellos se empiezan a alejar, ¿no?, añadiendo otros elementos, están trabajando sobre la misma base armónica.
Right, even when they're creating variations and going off kind of a tangent, they're still working on the same basic harmonic framework.
Entonces el oído por donde se guía es sobre la base armónica que ellos están tocando. Ellos pueden hacer cualquier cosa, pero siempre van respetando ese camino.
Right, and that's always to be respected. It's not a boundary, but rather it's a framework upon which everybody agrees, and you're using your ear to really pay attention to what the others are doing.
Entonces, como que es el GPS.
That's your internal GPS, your navigation system.
Entonces sobre eso puedes ir a donde quieras, pero ya yo te tengo, ¿no?
Right, but I've got you and you've got me. In other words, we have three people collaborating. And for the reference here, again, it's three pianists together. We presented in San Francisco. Gonzalo Rubalcaba, Michel Camino, and Maestro Chucho Valdez playing the music of Lecuona. So it was unbelievable and unprecedented. Never happened anywhere else in the world. And then there's a moment where they're rotating. There's two concert grands on the stage, and they're rotating. Sometimes two on one piano, and then and it's like we were there, and you just couldn't believe what you were seeing and hearing. It's amazing.
Well, thank you.
I just can't help but notice that there are two pianos here, and I wonder if you could demonstrate something like that.
Maybe que como hay dos pianos aquí, sí podríamos demostrar algo. You're really going to do that to me? Yeah. No, aquí. All right. Para que se no, pongo la pequeñita porque... A ver. No, está bien. Pongo la pequeñita. Sí, la pequeñita. So, yeah, this is good. So it's not... Because I don't want en fa, ¿no?
Voy a hablar en mi español, que me encanta hablar así, guapo de la calle, no sé cómo decir eso.
He's going to be just being really straight with you for a minute.
Y es increíble, ¿eh? Ustedes lo han visto. Yo la admiro, la quiero muchísimo, es una de las personas que más respeto en todo el mundo.
Okay, I'm going to translate, I'm going to cry, so I'm not going to say that. But there's a lot of love here, and mutual respect and admiration. But I can't tell you, like, what I was experiencing when I went over there and tried to think about what I was going to do. Like, okay, hold it together, Rebecca. But it's beautiful because this music is so pure in that way. Now, you heard how many different musical references in his solos? Like, I mean, I had 2, and he had like 20,000. And it's such a range, the Flight of the Bumblebee, and it's like all these different things that he's able to absorb and bring and demonstrate so fluidly. And for those of us who are students of this music, eternal students of this music, that's the thing that's the most inspiring, that there's this incredible lineage and legacy and repertoire. Understanding of the repertoire, but there's also this deep, this depth, this musical depth and awareness of what's happening in the world, and has been going on for decades, you know, and maybe even centuries in the evolution of the instrument, you know, from his perspective. And to say Chucho Valdez is a Cuban pianist, no, he's a pianist of the planet, you know. And I mean, I remember hearing solos where in one fell swoop you're hearing Dave Brubeck, and then you go into Nadia Boulanger, and then it's just like, you know, and McCoy Tyner, and estamos hablando de las, digamos, las influencias tuyas, sobre todo después de que ibas desarrollando tu propio estilo, de Horace Silver, por ejemplo, y después de McCoy, de Herbie, y los modernistas, y ¿por qué no, si en el tiempo que nos queda, hablar un poquito sobre ese momento de la formación de Irakere, al escuchar esos temas y esos músicos que estaban, digamos, empujando un poquito el concepto musical, y es un momento un poquito difícil, ¿no?, de hacerlo en Cuba. Saying maybe he could speak to a little bit of that, like at some point, you know, really after the revolution in Cuba, that moment of almost defiance and listening to music that was much more contemporary, and who were the influences that were shaping him, and also his vision for the leadership of Irakere, the groundbreaking group, the first band in Cuba to win a Grammy. You know, who are they listening to in secret, right? ¿A quién estaban escuchando en ese momento? Los discos esos de Miles Davis y de Earth, Wind and Fire and Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears, right?
Sí, antes de Irakere, nosotros teníamos ya un quinteto que éramos con Paquito de Rivera, algunos de los miembros de la orquesta cubana de música moderna.
At that point, this is right before the foundation of this group Irakere, he was part of the Modern Music Orchestra. Several of the members of that orchestra would go on to form the band with him.
Éramos un grupo de jóvenes que estábamos en la misma frecuencia.
We were all the same frequency. We were all about the same age. We had a lot of musical interests that were a departure from what the elders were telling us.
Estábamos empezando a integrar un espacio donde no entró nada de música de jazz en Cuba.
And we were entering a period in Cuba where jazz was really not being permitted. And as ironically as it was, because jazz had always been connected to Cuban music, but this was a period of difficulty politically where you were not able to express yourself and your interest for American music.
Y a través de la radio, ¿no?, de
Shortwave radio.
Fue que empezamos a conectarnos con la realidad que desde los 60.
And this is when we started to become aware of what was happening musically, in reality in the 1960s, especially in American music.
Ahí descubrimos a McCoy Tyner,
That's where we heard McCoy Tyner,
Bill Evans,
Bill Evans,
Herbie,
yeah,
Keith Jarrett,
Keith Jarrett,
y a todos estos grandes genios, ¿no?, que se mantienen hoy.
and all those incredible geniuses who many of whom are still with us on the planet,
En especial a John Coltrane.
especially people like John Coltrane.
Y entonces queríamos hacer música cubana o afrocubana, pero que tuviera esos elementos, ¿no?
So we wanted to create something that was truly Afro-Cuban, but that had those musical elements and influences.
e inclusive incorporar elementos de la música africana o afrocubana a esto.
And especially to bring it the other way, right? To bring the Afro-Cuban element or even the traditional African element into jazz music.
Y esa fue el comienzo de la semilla, ¿no? De lo que fue creciendo.
And that was the seed, the impetus for what we were going to do eventually with Irakere.
Y voy a dar el salto y la que le voy a pasar por lo demás. Entonces, hicimos primero un disco que se llama Ya Bata 1.
So the first album that Chucho recorded was called Jazz Bata #1.
Entonces yo pensaba introducir toques africanos en el piano y unirlo con elementos de diferentes etapas del jazz, ¿no?
So his idea was to take sacred drum rhythms, Afro-Cuban sacred drum rhythms, incorporate them in the piano, and then bring those elements into jazz.
Nosotros queríamos hacer eso. Teníamos muchas opiniones en contra,
There were a lot of people who were resistant to the idea.
porque muchos músicos decían que estábamos contaminando la pureza de la música.
People were saying we were contaminating the musical purity.
En eso no estábamos de acuerdo y luchamos muchísimo.
And we rebelled against that, and we struggled a lot.
Entonces yo compuse además un tema que se llama Neurosis, que lo tengo que volver a montar,
So, as a result of that, I composed a piece called Neurosis,
porque me tenían neurótico.
because it had us all neurotic. We were all really worried about this thing.
Era a base de clusters.
And it was based on chord clusters, like the idea of, lots of notes mushed together.
Voy a poner un ejemplo cortico de lo que
Do a little bit of
y es una especie de blues.
it's kind of like a blues. It's like you have the Cuban song, you have a little bit of rhythm changes, right? With an atonal bridge. So that was one of his pieces that he did. As a result of, again, of like trying to find that different musical path.
El otro fue lo que pusimos
Son 21.
son 21.
Yeah, this is Son 21, the piece that I played during the lecture the other day.
Entonces había atmósfera, ¿no?
And there was some sort of ambiance around that.
O sea, no lo entendíamos.
And people would have a hard time because they didn't understand what we were doing.
Me querían borrar el disco ese.
And they wanted to erase it. They didn't want to keep anything that we had recorded.
Decía que eso se llamaba piano loco.
And they thought it was crazy piano.
Pero resultó que eso fue algo que creó una base, porque no usamos el drums en ese disco.
And it marked a new era for a lot of the sort of the jazz players because they didn't use a drum set. They used a percussionist instead of the traditional jazz set.
Utilizamos toda la base de tambores, de tumba, bata,
Like
todo lo que
congas,
fuera.
bata, all these other
afro-cubano.
percussion instruments. So it was very Afro-Cuban in that regard, and it was like Afro-Cuban music with a jazz aesthetic as opposed to like a jazz band with some Cuban elements thrown in. It was really the Afro-Cuban was the base. And that became the foundation for Irakere, which then of course incorporated the jazz drum set and all the percussion and an incredible horn section that all had studied jazz and classical music and played Cuban music. So it was that triumvirate of all those influences coming together. Y otra pieza importante mencionar el mambo influenciado, que
Sí.
lo notaron ahí, que the piece that, one of the combos played yesterday, mambo influenciado, which is the first piece that Chucho composed in 1962, 62 o 63, somewhere between. So the anniversary of that piece is sometime now. But the idea was to create what we could consider it to be a jazz standard composed in Cuba, and it's the first one. So the piece that we played, and the minor blues, and very inspired by Horace Silver.
Sí. Pero bueno, del jazz batá lo que pasó fue que eso mismo decidimos ponerle una sección de metal y después el jazz batá se convirtió en iraquere.
Right, so jazz bata as a quartet, and they added a horn section, and that's when iraquere was born. And la historia esa de que grabaron el bacalao con pan y que fue un DJ en una estación de radio que So the group was also formed during a time when all the musicians were still part of the Modern Music Orchestra. And the authorities did not want to give Chucho permission to kind of break away and do his own band. And so they had recorded a piece called Bacalao con Pan, which was then played sort of surreptitiously on the radio, and it became a hit. And it forced the hand of the Cuban government to recognize Iraquere as its own band, and then they were able to break away. Of course, again, first band to win a Grammy in Cuba. But I think that's important to recognize that there was always an idea of not only being musically adventurous and cutting edge, but also defying these restrictions and being able to say this music we want to do should not have any political barriers, right? It should just be music for everybody who loves music, and that in and of itself is a feat of accomplishment of this person here. Una pregunta ahí.
Oh, no, it's okay.
No, por favor.
I was just curious when you said they wanted to keep it pure. Was it the Afro-Cuban part they wanted to keep pure, or the jazz part, or the
El
European
momento
part?
que había las personas que querían mantener una pureza en la música, ¿eran los jazzistas o los músicos cubanos que no querían
Yeah, but maybe the European part, or
o la europea?
and if you can talk about the folkloric side in his life as well, that'd be great.
Eran todos.
Everybody was against the blending.
Uno decía que estábamos contaminando la música pura cubana y otros decían que estábamos contaminando el jazz con tambores que no son.
Right. So like the jazz purists would say, no, well, you're putting things that should belong. Like the African percussion doesn't belong in jazz.
Pero bueno, nosotros decíamos, existe la música afro-cubana y la música afroamericana.
So there's Black American music, there's Afro-Cuban music, it all has the African elements in it.
Son dos hermanas que se pueden perfectamente fusionar y eso es bueno para las dos partes.
The sisters, and they should be fused. It's good for both sides to have that union.
Le hacemos la historia más influenciada ahora que
Sí.
hay que tomar atrás.
Sí, pero son las 3 menos pico, podemos unos 5 minutos
Sí,
más
sí.
preguntas.
Explícalo.
Okay, so mambo influenciado then, cuando empezaste el jazz bata ya se había compuesto el tema, ¿no?
Mucho.
Y era en la instrumentación, la guitarra, flauta, bass clarinet,
Sí.
bicornio.
Pero me gustaría más ir a lo que es la fusión.
Oh, okay. So, for example, the creation of the piece Mambo Influenciado, taking a minor blues form, which is a standard, harmonic framework. We were talking about harmonic framework. Just like the blues, the 12-bar blues, the minor blues is also 12 bars, and it's a standard foundation upon which many composers create new melodies. So he wanted specifically to create something based on the minor blues.
Primero, si no podemos tocar el jazz, porque es música que no es cubana, según estaba establecido en ese momento, la cosa era cubanizar el jazz.
So if we were not allowed to play jazz because the government was telling us we couldn't play jazz, let's Cubanize the jazz. Let's add the clave. Let's transform the rhythm so that it's not swing, right? It's straight eights, right? So that was the approach, to Cubanize the aesthetic of jazz, but create something that was clearly Afro-Cuban.
No contaminado.
Not contaminated. Blended well together. So take the idea of the montuno and plug that in la agua continuo, right, the rhythmical ostinato, and plug that into a minor blues form. Si quieres tocar un poquito de la melodía de mano influenciada,
Y lo que hicimos añadir la melodía,
sí,
pero con el cambio armónico por lo mismo.
sí, con el cambio armónico, sí. So that's the I just want to recognize also the harmonic evolution of what he was doing, right? So, because it was transcending what was happening in Cuba at the time. You know, there were the people who were the jazz purists, then the Afro-Cuban music was harmonically pretty straight ahead and not very beefy, you know. It was, you know, triads and seventh chords and not a lot of extended voicings and quartal harmonies. So, again, the union of all those things, the bringing together of all those things as opposed to keeping things sort of separated out was the beauty of that piece. And this is the piece that you need to know if you're going to play it in jazz, una descarga in a jam session. You got to be able to play más influenciado. Una pregunta que también tenía Isabel acerca de la incorporación, o sea, el concepto de la percusión afrocubana en las tradiciones más sagradas de la música afrocubana y la incorporación de esos elementos en el yaqueo, que era tan influyente y tan importante.
Es que Oscar Valdez,
So your point about the percussion element, and what was it about the creation of this new project, bringing in all these elements of traditional percussion traditions, coming from the sacred, Afro-Cuban sacred traditions, as well as secular. And he acknowledges it was Oscar Valdez, who was one of the co-founders of the group, who made a point to bring a lot of the traditional elements of the bata drums, which were previously only used in sacred ceremonies, then to bring those elements onto the stage, mixing that with jazz, with an electric guitar, with a drum set, so that you're deliberately putting these things together in the same space and defying all the purists and the political sphere and saying, we're going to big fat do it anyway.
I'm just curious because I know how intensely complex the sacred music is, the folkloric, the bata and the song and the dance and all of that. How in the world did he learn all of that on top of all of what he was doing? And I know he lived there and heard it all the time, but it's like it takes you a lifetime to learn that stuff. So how?
¿Cómo es posible, después de que todo uno aprende, sobre todo lo que has aprendido y has desarrollado, el hecho de añadir toda esa, digamos, esa historia, esas tradiciones de la percusión, de los toques de bata, ¿cómo es que uno hace eso? Pues una pregunta un poquito retórica, ¿no? A rhetorical question. How do you do it? You know?
primero escuchando y aprendiendo.
Listening and learning.
Y tratando, bueno, por lo menos yo trato de llevar al piano algo de eso también, de los elementos rítmicos.
And also treating the piano as it is, as a percussion instrument, helps, like really referencing those rhythmical elements on the piano.
What's the question?
Music, I'll repeat it. Yeah. So at what point, and I'll say it in English and then I'll translate it. At what point did he achieve his musical identity? ¿A qué momento de su etapa creativa, carrera, crees que desarrollaste tu identidad musical?
Yo creo que a partir del mambo influenciado fue que yo fui encontrando mi propio. Yo era como un seguidor de todo lo que hacía mi papá y él me decía, búscate a ti mismo. Y por el mambo influenciado fue que empecé como que a descubrir el mundo mío a partir de él.
So, he'd always been learning from his father and asking for advice, and his father had said, you have to find your own musical path. And he was learning obviously from everything that he had been absorbing, but it was when he created the piece Mambo Influenciado in 1962, 63. So, at the age of 22, that he finally discovered his sound and was still on the road toward that. But that was the moment, the defining moment in his career, was the creation of that piece.
Usted quien toca el corno.
You're the horn player, right? It's like, yeah.
Tiene un lindo sonido.
Beautiful sound. By the way, he has a photographic memory. He remembers every single album, every single year it was recorded, how many people were on the album, who was the engineer of the album, when did it come out. So, like, an amazing memory. I don't remember what I did yesterday. He remembers everything. So, yes, he remembered hearing the beautiful sound.
Enseña a pianistas aquí, Russ Hoffman. Estoy seguro que tiene preguntas para usted.
Siempre hay muchas preguntas.
Russ Hoffman enseña a las pianistas aquí.
El profesor de piano.
El profesor de piano aquí.
Pues mira. Porque tiene una buena alumna también por acá.
You got some good students over here, yes.
Sí.
Sí. Well, I have so many questions. I had the good fortune, I got to spend one sabbatical in Havana. And tengo un primo en Havana, on Calle Salud y Velasco. Un singer. And I have to ask this just for me, because I don't know if he remembers, he was in a famous singing group called Los Heraldos Negros in Cuba in the 70s. And I know there's some old time musicians.
Era un grupo de, sorry, was it a cappella group? Or?
Yeah, it was a folklore group. And I went and met Enrique Fla with, and he remembered my cousin singing.
El primo de él cantaba en un grupo de los 70 en La Habana, era un grupo de vocal.
And all the ladies, Enrique's mother-in-law and everyone wanted to meet him because he was the cute one in the band.
Dígale que la suegra de Enrique Fla también quería conocerlo porque el muchacho era bien parecido.
But I had so many questions, and I want to buy your book, and I want to dig deep with this. And but anyhow, my questions was we had Alan Rodriguez was here a few years ago, a musicologist. Olavo Alain Rodriguez. And he was here, and he was talking about a couple of paths for rumba and danzón, and the separation of the paths of those musics. And I'm just, I don't want to get too far into
Right.
this,
So
any thoughts he has on that, and also what Isabel asked about the religious practice overlapping with.
So, primera parte de la pregunta es sobre todo, digamos, la fuente del danzón y la rumba y los caminos que tomaron musicalmente y donde habrá, no sé, cruce, ¿no?
Sí.
Pero también it's important to also recognize the son, because you mentioned the danzón and rumba, but son, if you talk about the evolution of Cuban popular music, you cannot not talk about the son.
Of course.
Right? So, it's more, again, a rhetorical question about, like, examinando, digamos, el camino del danzón y el camino de la rumba y también el son. Cómo que estos géneros se han unido a través de los años. ¿Qué diría usted?
El nacimiento del danzón, desde mi punto de vista, comienza a finales del siglo XIX.
Sí, 1876.
En el 71. Sí, ¿cómo se llama el que creó el danzón en el 79? Es el matancero. Bueno, el danzón nace en 1879. Creo que en Matanza. pero el danzón es hijo de la danza y la contradanza.
The danzón evolved from the danza and the contradanza and also the country dance or contradance European, right? So it was Africanized in the city of Matanzas, born in the 1870s, and then gives birth to the mambo and the cha-cha-cha. That evolution is the result of the inspiration and the influence of the son. Right? Whereas rumba developed its folkloric aesthetic as a secular form of traditional percussion, vocal music, also very influential, but it doesn't really cross paths with the danzón as much as the son as the sort of the dividing rod, I think, in uniting all of those elements. So it's really the son as the anchor for Cuban popular music. And so I think that's the important thing, because we can talk about the origins of the danzón and the origins of rumba also from Matanzas, right? But like at what point do they all converge? Muchos de los musicólogos dicen que realmente son 4 géneros que son los más influyentes. El danzón, el son, la rumba y la trova. Y de esos, digamos, de esas 4 ramas, nacen toda la flor.
Creo que era Miguel Faide.
Miguel Faide, sí. So the thing about these genres of music is how they never really existed in a vacuum. They all sort of coexisted at some point. But you know, danzón comes out of the European tradition, whereas rumba comes out of the African or Afro-Cuban tradition. And eventually we start to see the Africanization of the European and the Europeanization of the African. And truly hybrid. And the son is truly hybrid, right? Africa and Spain mashed together, but absolutely Cuban. So it's a fascinating thing. You mentioned the book that we've co-written is Decoding Afro-Cuban Jazz, the music of Chucho Valdez and Iraquere, so it really highlights his space, or his place in that space, right? Looking at the historical origins of the music, but what Iraquere did specifically was to bring all those things together. So in the one song of Iraquere, you heard the danzón, and you heard rumba, and you heard funk, and rock and roll, and disco, and Chucho was the first person to have all these crazy keyboards, you know, and vocoder, and you know, so it was like, come on, like this idea of like, you could drink from all of the fountains and still make music that was a unified whole there.
And dance to it.
And you could dance to it, you know, and you could take a Mozart piece and have Paquito Rivera playing on it, and it's Iraquere's version of Mozart. So I think all of those things are valid. Well, there's a lot of stuff here which we could spend all day. Anything else before we let you all go? Yes?
Yeah, just a small question. Are there any like jazz artists that you like that are more recent, like up and coming artists that you really like and you would recommend other people?
Algunos artistas de jazz recientes que usted está escuchando o recomienda, ¿cuáles son sus favoritos contemporáneos de jazz?
Realmente yo oigo a todos.
You listen to everybody.
O sea, desde por ejemplo, James P. Johnson,
From James P. Johnson
hasta Keith Jarrett.
to Keith Jarrett.
Ahora te puedo decir, todos me gustan, pero hay algunos que más prefiero, ¿no?
There's some that he really prefers or he taps into. Craig Taborn.
Yo practico solo, para mí, el stride piano, porque es muy difícil.
Yeah, so he really likes to go back to the stride piano tradition, and that's something that really reaches him.
Y porque ahí los pianistas no tenían un bajista y la mano izquierda.
Right, well, now bass players couldn't do all the heavy lifting, right? Build that muscle.
Entonces sí, después me lancé hacia, primero mi papá me lanzó a Art Tatum,
So his father turned him on to Art Tatum
a Bob Powell,
and Powell, right?
a Fluvius Monk.
Thelonious Monk, of course.
Después yo solo me lancé a Horace Silver,
Then he discovered Horace Silver,
a Ray Garland,
Ray Garland,
a Winston Kelly,
Wynton Kelly,
a Bill Evans,
Bill Evans. I don't need to translate.
McCoy, Herbie, Chick, Jarrett, y uno que a mí me encanta, que es complicado, es Cecil Taylor.
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
Pero cuando yo hago algo, bueno, cuando estoy hablando de jazz puro, no solamente.
It's talking specifically about jazz.
Yo espérate, me faltó Dave Brubeck,
Dave Brubeck,
que fue mi inspiración
was a
también.
big inspiration.
Fue cuando mezclo la ficha, pongo, voy a coger aquí, pero eso viene solo, yo no lo programo nunca.
Right. He doesn't do it intentionally then, he just draws from inspiration from all of them. Pero lo más reciente, si estamos hablando de Robert Glasper, estamos hablando de Craig Taborn.
Ajá, bueno, ahí, bueno, me faltó esa parte. Robert Glasper, Jason Moran,
Jason Moran,
el Taylor,
Craig Taborn, yeah.
Brad Mendel.
Brad Mauleon.
Uf.
Yeah.
Joey
Joey Valdez.
Geoffrey Kieser.
Jeffrey Kieser, yeah.
Espérate, me falta de los jóvenes, Christian Sam
Christian Sands, yeah.
y el que acompaña a Cecil McLaurin Samba.
Cecil McLaurin Salvan's accompanist, blanking on his name, is also.
Sullivan Fortner?
Yes, Sullivan Fortner.
Sullivan Fortner y ahora Emmett Cohen.
Emmett Cohen.
Oh, yeah.
Emmett is on fire.
Yes, yes.
He's doing stuff with Sorara Joy now, so, you know.
Esos son mis...
So yes, so the short answer is, it's a long answer.
¿Eh?
Jean-Baptiste?
Sí, por supuesto.
Yeah.
Son muchos.
Yeah, so many. Not enough time in the day. Boy, what a treat. I hope everybody